Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Cardboard Dragon Reviews, a video review series designed to teach you a board game as if you're sitting at the table with me, as well as to provide a review on that game in hopes of helping you decide if that game is right for you. Today we are taking a look at Forbidden Island, which is a cooperative board game for 2 to 4 players. It takes about a half hour to play and is recommended for ages 10 and up. In this game, we are playing as treasure hunters who are working together to try to get these 4 treasures off of the island. However, it's a race against the clock because the island keeps flooding, and indeed parts of the island may become so flooded that they're now impassable to us. So it's a race against the clock to get all 4 treasures, get to our helicopter, and get off the island with our riches in tow. So let's go ahead and let's teach you how to play Forbidden Island. Alright, so let's take a look at how we play this game. The first thing we need to do is get our decks of cards separated. We have 2 basic decks of cards here. We have these blue decks, which on the other side show places. And then we have this kind of red-orange deck, which are treasure cards and special abilities. So we need to get those separated, and then we need to shuffle them up. Okay, we need to get all of these tiles out, and we need to get them all on their colored sides. You see, tiles have a kind of washed out, just white and blue colored. That's the back of the tile. You want them to show the colored side, like so. And we arrange them in this pattern randomly, so shuffle them up and arrange them in this pattern. So typically you could go with a 4x4, and then 2 in the middle of each of the sides. And we just set the treasures out somewhere by the board that are within easy reach of everybody. Okay, and then what we have to do is begin to sink the island. So our goal in this game again is to get the treasures out, and the island is going to be sinking as we're playing, and it's basically a timer. Eventually we will lose the game because the island gets too flooded for us to do our job of getting the treasures out. So the board starts partially flooded. So to do this, you would have shuffled up this deck, and then you need to draw 6 cards from it, one at a time. So when you draw your first card, you take a look. And here we have, the copper gate. So we look for the matching tile that's on the board. Here's the copper gate, and we flip it over to its washed out side. This means that this tile is flooded. We can still do things with it. We can still walk through it. It's not out of the game yet, but it's in danger of being taken out of the game. So we need to do this 5 more times, so 6 total when you start the game. So we have a Crimson Forest, and again, this is all random. Cave of Embers, Misty Marsh, Lost Lagoon, and one more, the Cave of Shadows. There we go. Okay, so our island is now set up to begin playing the game. Now what we need to do is we need to take all 6 of these cards here. These are the roll cards. They're going to give you some special abilities that let you do things that normally you couldn't do. Basically breaking rules that you normally wouldn't be able to. And you're supposed to randomly assign these to the players. So 1 to each player. So I'm just going to take a green and a red. Okay, and then you take their matching pawns. So we have a green pawn and a red pawn, and we need to put them on the board where we see that color of pawn. So at the copper gate, we see a green pawn is drawn on it there in the bottom corner. So that's where the green player starts, and we can see here at the bronze gate, that is where the red player begins. There's one other important piece I want to show you, and that's this piece called Fool's Landing. This is a very important piece. It's also where blue would start, but that's a piece to keep in mind. And there are also 8 of these tiles that have the treasure pictures on them. So here we see the kind of aqua green or blue treasure. There's 2 tiles for each of the 4 treasures. So there's 2 red tiles here, 2 purples are up here, the 2 greenish blues, and the 2 yellows. So those are the important tiles to know about. The other ones, other than possibly starting you in a spot, don't do anything special. Okay, and then we need to shuffle up the regular deck of cards, and each player will get 2 cards. And when you play this game, because it's cooperative, it suggests that you play with your cards face up so other people can see what you have. And if you happen to be dealt one of these cards, like I just was, this Water's Rise, you just shuffle it back into the deck and give that player another card for now. Okay. Then we need to choose our difficulty, and after this we are ready to start playing this game. So you take out this piece here, you'll have the dial on there. This chooses your difficulty. The number on the side basically tells you how many bad cards you're going to have to draw every turn. And you can see there's a skull and crossbones up at the top here. If you ever get to that level, you die and lose the game. So setting it just below the 3, you can see there's words here: novice, normal, elite, and legendary. So where I have it set is for the normal difficulty. You can turn the difficulty up and down to your liking. So we'll set it to normal for now. And at this point, we are ready to begin playing the game. So again, the object of the game is to get these 4 treasures in our possession between the 2 players. It doesn't matter what the distribution is. One player could have all 4, or they could be split up any way. And then we need to get back to Fool's Landing, which is the spot I showed you down here that has a helicopter on it. And we need to we need to get there and use a special card called a helicopter lift to get off of the island. There are several ways for us to lose this game, though. The first is for Fool's Landing to become completely flooded and out of the game. We'll talk about how that happens. The other way is for both of a color of treasure to become completely flooded and removed from the game before we have a chance to recover that color of treasure. So if both of the red ones were gone and we hadn't gotten the red treasure here, then we would lose the game. We have to get all of the treasures in order to win. So how do we do that? What does a turn look like in this game? So on your turn, the first thing you do is take up to 3 actions. Now what you can do on your turn, ignoring special abilities for now, I'll get into these after, I'll tell you the basic rules first. So the first thing you can do is move, and you can move orthogonally in this game, so no diagonals. So for 1 action point, you can move to an adjacent tile that is not a diagonal. You could spend all 3 action points doing that if you want. You do whatever these actions I'm telling you about as many times as you want, up to 3 actions. What I'm saying is you can repeat the same action over and over as long as you have the action points to do so. So that's moving. You can also do what's called shore up. So when these tiles become flipped over to their washed out side, you can spend 1 point to an adjacent tile, including the tile that you're on as well, and flip it back to its colored side. You will want to do this to important tiles because when they're flipped over to their washed out side, they're in danger of being completely removed from the game and never being able to come back. So especially for places that like Fool's Landing, or places that have treasures, or for places that might you might need to walk across to get to those types of tiles, it is important to focus on shoring those up so they don't disappear on you. So, for instance, green here could spend an action. He was here. He could spend one action to flip this tile, and then one action to flip, called shore up, this tile. If you shore up a tile that you're on, it doesn't do anything. You just lift your piece up and set yourself back onto it. Okay, so that's shoring up. We've talked about moving. You can also give treasure cards. So in this deck, there are treasure cards that match the 4 types of treasures. So you can see we have the purple one here, and there's all the different ones are represented in the deck. So what you want to do is collect 4 of these to yourself. So one player needs to have 4 of a kind. So one way to facilitate that is by, if you are on the same space as another player, so if green was here, you can spend one action to give 1 card to another player, 1 treasure card. So we could give this here to this player to try and help him make his sets. Now you have a hand limit of 5 cards in this game. If you ever get more than that, you have to discard. But before you discard, you can use any special cards you have if you want. There are 2 types of special cards, one of which I showed you, and that's what you need to get off of the island, which is a helicopter lift. But in addition to being used to get off the island, you can also use it to move any player to any space on the board. And you don't have to do that on your turn. It doesn't cost an action either. So if red had this, they could spend it, even if it wasn't their turn, to move green over here so they could try and cash in the purple treasure. The other type of card you also don't have to do on your turn, and it doesn't cost an action. That's Sandbags. When you play Sandbags, that lets you shore up any tile you choose anywhere on the board. You don't have to be adjacent to it. So why are you trying to get 4 of a kind, and what do you do when you actually have 4 of a kind? So when you get 4 of a color of treasure, you're trying to get to a tile that has the matching treasure on it. So let's say that green was able to get 4 yellow cards. They would want to go to a spot like this that has a yellow treasure in the bottom corner. There are 2 of these each on the board. Here's the other one up here. Green would want to get to these, and then for an action they can trade in their 4 cards to the discard pile that you just have set aside, and then they would take the matching treasure and just keep it with their character. So they've claimed 1 treasure, so they're 1/4 of the way to winning the game now. So after you spent your 3 actions, we then have a phase where you draw 2 treasure cards. So again, you have a hand limit of 5. So you keep what you want. And once you claim a treasure, like if they already had yellow, these yellow cards are basically useless to them. There's no reason to hold on to them anymore. So those are ones you would probably discard. However, in this deck, there are some special cards, or one type of bad special card, I should say, and you've seen it already. That's Water's Rise. So what this does, when you draw one of these, you don't get a replacement card for it. It counts as one of the 2 you've drawn. So when you pick these up, you need to pick them up one at a time to make sure to see if you got a Water's Rise. It's possible you get 2 in a row of them, and then you do this process twice in a row. But when you draw one of these, the first thing you do is move the tick up here to a higher level. 1 higher level. Okay? Then any of these cards in this blue deck, called the Flood deck, Any that are in the discard pile get shuffled back up. Okay, and they will be placed on the top of the deck. And this is important for the next phase that I'll talk about in a second. They would normally be placed on top. I'm just going to set them in the discard pile here for later demonstration. And then you would take this card and set it in the discard pile. And then you would proceed to the next phase or draw another card if this is the first one you had drawn on your turn. So after you've drawn your 2 cards, there's one more phase, and that's flooding the island. So you take a look at the dial, and you look at what number your dial is currently in, what field. So we can see right now we're in the 3 field. It started in the 2, but then we drew a card, a Water's Rise, and moved up to the 3 field. This would still be in the 3 field, this would still be in the 3 field, and now we're into the 4 field. And again, if we ever get up to this point where we put it up here by the skull and crossbones, that's a loss. We've died. But you look at this here, look at the number where your tick is, and that's how many of these flood cards you need to draw. So we're in the 3, so we will draw 3 of them. Now when you pick them up, you look. This is just like what you did to set the game up again. So you take a look. This is the Coral Palace. And now we find the Coral Palace and we flip it over. So that was one card we drew. The Gold Gate gets drawn, it gets flipped over. And the Twilight Hollow gets flipped over as well. When pieces are flipped over like this blue, they don't do anything to you. You can move through them the same way you could otherwise. The only difference is you can shore them up because they're in danger of being removed from the game. So when you pull these Water's Rise cards, again, what happens is part of that, and it says on the card what they do if you get lost, but part of that is shuffling up the cards you've already drawn and putting them back at the top of the deck. Now, why is that a problem? What does that matter? Well, let me show you right now. On a later turn, or on later turns, now what that means is cards that you've drawn to flood, to flip over to their washed out side, are now going to get drawn again. So here we have drawn the Lost Lagoon. And we can see up here the Lost Lagoon is already flooded. It's already on its washed out side. Okay, so when you draw a card that's already on its washed out side, you remove that tile from the game. And you take its card with it as well. It gets removed from the game. So this is a gaping hole here that now cannot be walked through. You can't swim across. There's nothing you can do about that. Except if you have a special ability, and I'll talk about those later. But for most players, that's just a big gap you're not going to be able to get across. And getting a couple of them, not so big of a deal. But when that's cutting off paths to parts of the island, you could end up stuck on a tile and have nowhere to go in this game and have to hope that somebody has a helicopter lift to get you out. But why this is bad, aside from that, is you can also lose places like this that have treasure markers on them. And if you lose both of a color before you get that color, you can't get that treasure, and then you've lost the game. Once you lose one of these tiles, you can never get it back. Okay, so there were still 2 more for us to draw here. We got the Copper Gate again, so it's gone. And the Crimson Forest, which is also gone. So that's why you need to be shoring up tiles. It basically gives them 2 lives, if you will. And after you draw your flood cards, you put them in the discard pile. And then it's the next player's turn. And that's all there is to this game. Now, to finish the game, you have to have claimed all 4 treasures by trading in 4 of a kind cards in the proper tiles. And then you all need to get to Fool's Landing, which is the helicopter space. And then one player needs to use, doesn't have to be their turn, one of you has to have the helicopter lift. And spend that, and then you've won the game. Again, if the tiles of treasures you don't have get removed from the game. You can't get those treasures. That's the way you lose. You also lose if Fool's Landing is gone, because you can't leave the island then. And the other way you lose is if this track gets to the Skull and Crossbones. So that's really it about how to play. I'll talk about the special abilities now and what they do. So red, and on the back of these, I just want to show you there's a kind of a cheat sheet. Sorry, it's out of the camera. And it just tells you if you ever happen to get lost, it's like a cheat sheet to tell you how to play, player aid. So let's take a look at what the different colors do, because every color does something different. Red is an engineer. They get to shore up 2 tiles for 1 action. So if we have red here, normally it would cost them 1 action to flip this tile over and another action to flip this over, but their ability is to flip both of these over, 2 tiles that are adjacent to them, for 1 action. So it saves them actions. They're good at flipping the tiles over. We take a look at black. This is probably the most confusing. This is the diver. And what the diver allows you to do is move through flooded, which are these washed out tiles, or missing tiles for 1 action. So we have black here. They can move from the Misty Marsh straight to the Coral Palace for 1 action because all of these tiles are flooded. They can also move across gaps where there are no spaces. For 1 action, for instance, they could go like this. Now they can never end their turn where there is no tile. They have to end their turn on a tile. Okay. The Explorer can move diagonally as well as shore up diagonally. So flip over tiles diagonally. The Pilot can once per turn move to any space on the board. The Yellow player is a navigator, and they can move another player 2 spots, and they still have to follow the rules of adjacency, and that costs them 1 action. So they can move other people around the board. And then we have the Messenger. So again, normally you would have to be on the same space to give cards to somebody, but the Messenger can give cards to anybody on any space. Now that we have that out of the way, there's one thing I realized I didn't talk about, and that's what happens when you are on a tile. Say you're on a tile and it gets flipped over just once. Nothing happens to you. You're fine. Now, if this gets drawn again while you're on the tile, you must move to an adjacent tile, except if you're one of the special moving characters. So those are blue, green, and black. They all move in different ways than the other players. So if they were to be on this tile here, which was here, and it got flipped and removed from the game, every other player would have to move to either the Cave of Embers, the Howling Garden, or the Coral Palace. But these guys are special. They can use their movement ability. So blue can move to any space on the board at this point. Green can go to an adjacent tile diagonally if he would like to. And black can use their swimming ability if they want. A couple extra rules that I wanted to touch on quickly. One is there's an other way to lose the game. It would be pretty rare for it to happen, though it could happen. We have red here who doesn't get any special moves. But if this tile gets flooded, again, and removed from the game, if you have no tile to move to now, everybody loses a game, like is the situation right now. That's pretty rare that would happen. A couple other things that I didn't mention. When this deck runs out, when you've gone through it, you just reshuffle up the discard pile and make a new deck and start from there. Same goes for this deck. Well, that probably won't happen because the Waters Rise will keep putting cards on top of it, but if it does happen, just reshuffle everything and make a new deck. Also, if you draw a Waters Rise and there are no cards in the discard pile, that's okay. You just tick up the dial one more place. All right, so that's actually the entire game there. Let me go ahead and give you my final thoughts. So, final thoughts on Forbidden Island. I think this is a really great game to introduce people to modern board gaming, particularly the cooperative genre, which for a lot of people is something that they've never seen before. Games where you work together. I mean, there's some kids games that were like that people may have played, but generally most games people have played who aren't into the hobby are competitive. I know for me that was something that blew my mind, working together against the game to try and win. It's very simple, and the backs of your ability cards have this cheat sheet. Right there you basically have all the rules to the entire game written on a card, with some exceptions. Once you get the game explained to you once and you have this card here, you're pretty much good to go. And can refer to that card if you ever get confused or lost. Component-wise, this game is awesome. The treasures are really cool. The tiles are neat, the way that they flip over and look different. The cards are good quality. It comes in a tin, which is a little weird. I'm not a big fan of it just because of storage, stacking things on top of each other, but that's no big deal. But it's a good introduction game. There's some strategy to what you do, definitely. So if you're new to board gaming and you are interested in a cooperative game, I would definitely suggest this could be your first one, just because of how easy it is. I think you'll get a lot of plays out of it. Now, if you're a more seasoned board gamer, you'll look at this game. You might recognize the name of the designer of this game as well and realize that he made a game called Pandemic. And you might look at some of the concepts, like this flood deck, and getting matching sets and trading among players, and say, gee, that's a heck of a lot like Pandemic, just a little bit simpler. And that's kind of my problem with the game at this point in my gaming life, because I played so many games. There is another game very much like this called Pandemic, but it's got more strategy, it's got more depth, and I like it a lot more, so there's no real reason for me to play this game that much anymore unless I'm teaching new people. It's still fun, there's nothing wrong with it, but I could play Pandemic and have a better time, and Pandemic isn't really that much more of a difficult game for me, because I play a lot of games. So if you're experienced in board games, I would say try Pandemic instead, just because I feel like this gives you a very similar feeling to Pandemic, but you have more decisions to make in Pandemic, and overall I think Pandemic is a better game. And you can see on my Board Game Geek profile if you want, it's one of my favorite games and one of the most played that I own. So if you're new to board gaming, I definitely recommend this game though. You can get it fairly inexpensively, I think around $20 for a new copy. But if you're more seasoned, just because of how light this game and how light this game is and how similar it is to Pandemic, I would recommend going with Pandemic if this idea here tickles your fancy. So it's a 6 out of 10 for me. I like the game. It's a good game. Just there are more in-depth games that aren't that much harder and much more fun, including one by the exact same designer that gives me a very similar feeling. So 6 out of 10 for me. Recommended if you're new at playing games. Other than that, this has been Chris for Cardboard Dragon Reviews. Please like and subscribe on YouTube. That helps me out a lot. Leave some comments or feedback if you have any. I would appreciate that. And until next time, keep your dice on the table.